Hi guys, I'm Kristen. This is Kristen is Fully Booked, and today I'm going to tell you about the books I've been reading recently. So I think this is maybe going to be one of those like currently reading, just recently read, what's coming up next, sort of a style of wrap up for me today. I'm thinking about switching more into that format going forward, maybe doing like a weekly check-in of where I am at, some life/channel update. I guess I should start by apologizing. This video is coming out a day late, I'm assuming, because I doubt it's going to be able to be filmed and edited and uploaded before the end of tonight. I really, really doubt it. You're probably seeing this on Tuesday instead of Monday, but who knows? And that's just because my mind has been all over the place lately. I have not been able to focus on the channel stuff. I still have been reading, but I'm just kind of juggling a few other things lately, and I haven't necessarily been prioritizing channel. So I apologize. Things have been a little bit chaotic, and I anticipate that they will be even more chaotic moving forward for the next 2 months or so, and that is because I am moving. So we are staying in Denmark, which is really exciting, but we are moving to a different city. So we're moving to Copenhagen, and that comes with a lot of stress and a lot of just juggling of planning and finding an apartment and all of the things that go into moving. I'm sure you know if you have moved before. So I think that for the next couple months, the videos might switch down to one video a week, but I will sometimes try, or if I'm able to, I will get up a second video, but I'm going to stick to, or I'm at least going to confirm that there will be at least one video a week moving forward for the next couple months, with the occasional second video coming up. So we'll see how it goes. It feels really soon to be doing another recent reads video. I didn't think that I had been reading this much, but when I looked at my list, there were a few books I thought I could share with you, or wrap up for you. So the first book that I read since the last recent reads wrap up was House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. I did do a very, very rambly, very chaotic full review for this book, which you can check out. I will link it above. There is a non-spoilery section at the beginning, and then I go into my very rambly and chaotic spoilery thoughts. Overall, I was pretty disappointed in this book. Ultimately, I just felt like this book was really chaotic. The plot really didn't make sense. The decisions that the characters made didn't really make sense. And there were actually a lot of issues that I had with it. But I will say that Sarah J. Maas really has this way of writing characters that you want to stick around for. So at this point in the series, I'm like not in love with where the plot and the world is going. But I generally like a lot of the characters enough to want to spend a little bit more time with them, particularly a couple of the possible pairings that are happening, or one pairing in particular I'm fairly interested in, but I do think that this book was a pretty big flop, to be honest. I should have gotten my glasses so that I can see my screen. Okay, my keywords for this book were disappointing, pointless plot lines, plot convenience, urban fantasy, mates, new pairings, revisionist history, and rebellion. Did you read House of Sky and Breath? I was able to get a copy at my library, like right at the very beginning. I checked all day on the release day in order to like get a copy really early on, so I didn't have to buy this book, which I'm very glad about. I would have been very upset if I had spent money on an ebook copy of what that book was. I felt a little bit like I didn't quite get the angsty drama that I was expecting out of that book, and so when I finished this, I was looking for something that would fill that need for me, because that's what I was sort of hyping myself up for and then didn't get. And so I picked up a book that I've had saved on Scribd for a really long time now, but I just have kind of been saving it for this exact moment when I knew that that was the kind of feeling I was going to get out of this book, and so I put it off until this perfect timing, so it worked out. I don't know if that made sense. I don't know if you've realized I feel like a little bit of a chaotic mess personally today. So anyway, that book was These Hollow Vows by Alexi Ryan, and this is, I believe, not young adult. I think that it is adult, or I would personally put it in the category of new adult, and it is a fae romance book about a girl who lives in a world that is sort of, it's like one of those like adjacent to a fairy realm, and her sister goes missing or is sold into like slavery for one of the Fae kingdoms in the Unseelie court. And she travels into fairy, she makes a deal with someone in order to try to save her sister, and things get complicated from there. I think that this book did provide what I was looking for in the moment. It's an angsty Fae somewhat romance. The Fae world isn't exactly, or the two courts, the Seelie and Unseelie court aren't exactly what she thought they were going to be. Like it provides what you expect that setup to provide. So I was fairly satisfied from that perspective. I was fairly frustrated also though over the course of the book, and that's because there was a twist that I thought was very obvious while reading it, but I will say that I think I was a little bit spoiled for that because I saw some reviews, and while they weren't spoilery, they used some specific terms to describe an ending situation, and I feel like that made it obvious. I have maybe even spoiled it for you in saying that, so I apologize if that's the case, but just basically, I thought that there was something that was really obvious the whole way through, and so I felt really stressed and just frustrated with that whole situation. I will be picking up the next book in the series. I do really want to know what finds out. But I will say that I have complicated feelings about the dynamic. And on that note, I will give you the keywords here. So I wrote down Fae, love triangle, cliffhanger ending, duology, secrets, and curses. And this, in fact, got me into a bit of a mood where I was suddenly looking for even more of this angsty, young adult, new adult kind of a storyline. And up until recently, for a pretty big stretch of last year going into this year, I have not been in the mood for those books at all. Now, after this book, I just feel like I wanted a conclusion that didn't happen, in the sense that it's a cliffhanger ending. So you're like, no, I wanted to feel like something came together. And that actually led me to go back to the Dark Jewels, or the Black Jewels, whatever, that Anne Bishop trilogy that I mentioned in my last wrap-up. I had read the first book in that series. Daughter of the Blood, I mentioned reading and being like really disturbed by in my last recent reads video. But after finishing these Hollow Vows, because I didn't get like a conclusion to a certain arc, I actually, in a weird order, I jumped ahead to the third book in the Black Jewels trilogy. And that's because I first went to the second book, Heir of Shadows, I believe the second book is called, and I quick skimmed to the end, which I never do. Like, I just actually went to the end of the book to be like, okay, has the pairing like caught up yet? Like, has it happened yet? And it hadn't happened by the end of the second book. So I read the third book, Queen of Darkness, and I read that all the way through, was fairly satisfied with it. It actually was a much better read than the first book. The first book really focused on like all of these really traumatic, violent things that were happening within the world, like as a problem, so that in the second and third book those things could be fixed. And so it was not the focus at all. It was really a lot more of like found family. I don't think I wrote down keywords. I did not. It was really a little bit more of like found family and like this like fated pair coming together and finally concluding the plot of the world and stuff like that. So I actually had a pretty good read with that. And then I was kind of actually curious. I wanted to see how certain things had come together. So then I went back to the second book and read that, which was, I think, Heir of Shadows. I weirdly reread the Black Jewels trilogy, which after finishing the first book, I had absolutely no intention of doing. I don't know. I think it had some interesting things to say, especially about feminine and masculine dynamics between people and the idea of like serving or being respectful, like that. It had an interesting dynamic between the men and women within this matriarchal society. So anyway, as I said, rambly mess today. Okay, then I read The Bone Shard Daughter by, I always forget her name, Andrea Stewart. And this is one of my priority books for the year. I think I included it in a list of like 3 books that I was going to prioritize this year, and this was one of them. And so now I've read it. Really liked it. It was not what I was expecting. Everyone describes the setup for the book in relation to the main character, who is the daughter of an emperor in this world that uses bone shard magic to create these constructs that are like animated dead things, kind of like mixture zombies of very random mixtures of animals. I'm not describing it well, but they're animated using bone shards. And our main character has lost her memory. She has amnesia up until 3 years ago. She can't remember anything that happened before that. And she is sort of in a competition to like win the throne or to be named heir with her father's foster son. But there are other POVs that are, I would say, just as important or we spend just as much time there. So another POV is Jovis, who is someone who his wife went missing 7-ish years ago, and he was a smuggler, and he's basically been somewhat searching for his wife ever since, and he kind of gets accidentally roped into saving these kids from a tithing ceremony, and that's because the bone shards that are used to animate the constructs in this world by the Emperor come from children at the age of 8. All the kids in a town or on an island are collected, and they have like a piece of their bone, of their skull, removed from their body, and the constructs, when they are used, it actually like drains your life force. So we have Jovis and Lynn, who is the Emperor's daughter, and then we also have Falou, yeah. Then we also follow Falou and Ranami, who are a sapphic couple living on a different island. Actually, the world is really cool. I'll get back to that. They're a couple. We do get both perspectives. I think we get Falou's more in the first book, but I honestly can't remember. Falou is the daughter of a governor of one of these islands, and they kind of get roped into a little bit of a rebellion that is happening. So those are the main storylines, or the main POVs that we follow. I actually think that Jovis plays a very significant role. Like, we spend a lot of time with Jovis. He felt a little bit more like a main character even than Lynn did in the first book, because there's so much mystery around Lynn. She doesn't know what's going on. She's trying to figure out what's going on. She's trying to teach herself bone shard magic. And so because that all feels a little bit mysterious and there's a slow progression over time with that, we do spend a lot of time with Jovis, who has like a little bit more like action and progress in his storyline. I think this world is really cool. It's sort of described as like many, many islands that are floating and drifting around in this endless sea, which sounds very cool. The magic was an interesting take. I definitely got like Frankenstein, or what's that one called? I'm just thinking of House of Pain, the Island of Dr Moreau. Like, if you like those kind of eerie classics, this is maybe, I feel like this is a comparative fantasy novel for the classics, the Island of Dr Moreau and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I did like it enough to pick up the next book, so I'm currently reading The Bone Shard Emperor. Okay, before I talk about that later on when I get into like my currently readings, I will share my keywords with you here. So keywords for The Bone Shard Daughter, I wrote down mystery, memory loss, multi-POV, bone magic, gory. It's actually pretty descriptive with some of the construct stuff. Animal companion, I didn't mention there is such an adorable animal companion. So cute. Who I love. And LGBTQ+. So those are the keywords for The Bone Shard Daughter. Then I read Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. It's not exactly a dark romance, but it is a romance that has a lot of trauma in it. I actually even would hesitate to use the word romance for this book, because I feel like that's not necessarily the focus, although I think it is going to be the focus of the whole series. Now, I heard about this book from this Instagram account that I follow, Aviva's Library, I think. I'll put it up on the thing. I've mentioned this channel in the past because I have talked about this Addicted to You book on my Read Our Reads. I wasn't sure if it was going to sit with me. I also then, in the meantime, read a different book, Broken Night, that was from a recommendation video on Aviva's YouTube channel for Friends to Lovers, and I really hated it and DNF'd it. But despite that, I still wanted to at least check out Addicted to You, just because I was curious. And it is about these two characters, Lily and Lo. Lauren is the guy's name, actually, but he goes by Lo. Two friends. Lo, the guy, is an alcoholic, and Lily has a sex addiction. And this has been going on for since the kids were very young teenagers. And because they were best friends, around their senior year of high school, they essentially decide to come up with a plan to pretend to be in a fake relationship in order to cover for each other's addictions. So they've been doing this for 3-ish years, and I thought that was going to be that they slowly realized over time, but it's pretty obvious out the gate in this book that there is physical attraction and more than just friendship there between the two. I would say it becomes an issue a lot sooner than I was expecting in the arc of the book, and that's because I had a different expectation of the arc of this book. Even though I knew that it was a series, I did think that it would have sort of a complete arc in the first book, and that was wrong of me to think that. That's not the case. The story is not completed. at the end of the first book. And I think that it did a pretty good job of representing both of these addictions. I don't have any personal or secondhand experience with either of these types of addictions, or really addiction in general. So it was a lot of learning for me on that part. Like I went into this with absolutely no judgment for either addictions, but also not with a lot of knowledge. So it was really interesting to hear how at least Lily's addiction was described in like a mental and like physical sense of what she was feeling in regards to this sex addiction. And then we see Lo's alcohol abuse through Lily's eyes only. And it was interesting because I feel like you had some pretty significant highs and lows with both addictions over the course of the book. There are times when they both seem very functional, and there are times when they both seem very unfunctional. There are times when the addiction seems to be manageable and like things are okay, but then there are also times when they are very severe. I also even changed my opinion on which would be like a more livable addiction to have at various times throughout the book. There were times when I felt like Lily's addiction was so much more disruptive to her life than Lo's. And then there were also times when it felt like Lo's addiction was actually a lot more disruptive to his life. And that actually like went back and forth quite a bit. So it was a really interesting perspective of both of these addictions. I will say that the relationship is not romantic exactly. It is very, very codependent. They have this really crazy codependent relationship even while they're still friends. They're not using their friendship to try to be okay. They're using it to sustain and enable each other's addictions this whole time. So it's not only is it codependent, they basically are only friends and in contact with each other, but they are and have been for years. Let's just not talk about it, okay? Okay, where was I? Basically, they have been enabling, like intentionally enabling each other's addictions for 3 years. But I thought actually the authors did a pretty good job of making you feel like, at times you're like, yes, this is such a great dynamic. Like, if they can just keep this up, because the characters definitely feel like if only they can just keep up this ruse, everything will be fine. And then you realize that you're rooting for a situation that allows these extremely dangerous addictions, extremely is maybe a little bit intense, but these dangerous and severe addictions to continue. And you're almost rooting for them to like be together so that they can keep this up. And it was like a bit of a mind warp, to be honest. I wouldn't necessarily say that I enjoyed reading this book, but I didn't hate it either. It just was a really significant focus on addiction and mental health in a way that I knew that it was going to be about, but also didn't quite expect it to be this way. I think that I thought it would be more of a romance, and that isn't the focus, at least in this book, even though like the focus is on their relationship, but not in a romanticized way, which actually is very good. So at this point, I am not committing to reading like all of the books in this series, but I do feel pretty interested in picking up the next one. In fact, if it had been available at my library, I would have started reading it last night when I finished Addicted to You. The next book is Ricochet. Unfortunately, it has a 14-week waiting list at my library. Honestly, I am not sure what I'm going to do there because it is also available for a pretty reasonable price. So a little bit conflicted, but I'll talk about that more in my coming up, like what's next. I didn't do keywords for this one, but I will say like mental health, addiction, trauma, family dynamics, unhealthy relationships. That's what I would say. So those are all of the books that I have read recently. Now let's talk about what I am currently reading. So as I mentioned, I am currently reading The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart, the second book in the Drowning Empire series. I am not liking this one nearly as much as the first book. I'm finding there are certain dynamics between characters that I'm actually not really in love with. There is a bit of a relationship or like a romance growing. It's not a huge focus, but it is developing. It's kind of one that I feel like I could root for if it was better written. I think because I'm not buying the way that it's unfolding, I almost wish that it had just been a really good friendship. But I know that if I read this and it was a really good friendship, I would be like, oh, why can't they be together? I think that the potential is there. It's not that I don't buy that this is a thing. It's that I don't buy the way that it's being rolled out. There is a lot of lying and manipulation and abuse of trust going on, and I find that really difficult to deal with, especially because this certain character is making the opposite person feel like they're bad for not divulging everything to them, and yet this person is not divulging everything. I don't like it. I don't like that dynamic. It also feels like one of those books where everything is going wrong. And trying not to spoil what happened in the first book and what's happening in this book, I'll just say, let's like, you know, where you have those books where you feel like you start off already on the defensive. Like you already start off on the losing side and that everything has gone wrong. Like it's not like you're planning stuff and things start to go wrong. You're just not aware of everything that's gone wrong in the first book because of the memory thing and because you don't have all the information yet. But it definitely is one of those books where we're in a world setting like everything is going wrong and you can't even succeed because you're barely struggling to get breath or like break the surface of the water, and whatever, you know, metaphor or whatever you want to use there for that. It feels like they're playing defense and not planning and executing and rolling things out. And that's a very different type of book. And I don't know if it's a type of book that I like. I think that I like to see plans like put in place and executed and dealing with problems and not necessarily already on the defense and like scrambling. I think that was a distinction that I noticed in this book that I'm like, oh yeah, I actually didn't like this about Dune, for example, either. But that's the Bone Shard Emperor, not super in love with it, feeling moderately disappointed with a lot of the storylines here. And I'm also currently reading Malice, which I picked up the audiobook for. I have been, putting that book on postpone for over a year. It is one of my priority series for this year. I am pretty committed to reading the first 2 books, at least, because I've heard that the first book is a lot of setup. I thought that it would be good to listen to as an audiobook because I could just go about my business and sort of passively take in the world and the history, but actually the world and the history and everything that's happening in Malice is a little bit complicated. Like I feel like I keep getting names mentioned and like, oh, there's tension between these 2 people, or I haven't quite figured out the world yet. And I think that I haven't been able to piece things together because I'm listening to the audio and I'm having a little bit trouble keeping track of things. So I might have to switch to the physical or at least the ebook, which I have a copy of that from my library as well. So that's where I'm at with Malice. I'm not very far in, but I can't tell you exactly how far I am into that because I didn't write it down and it's on my phone. So that's what I'm currently reading. Coming up next, I do have some commitments, or at least I have one commitment here. I do really need to read Son of the Storm by Suyu Davies Okumbawa. That is for my fantasy book club, my local fantasy book club. We are meeting in 2 weeks and I need to have it read. This is a Western African inspired fantasy about a guy who I think is a scholar, and one day he meets or sees a warrior who appears to have a certain type of magic that isn't supposed to exist. So I think it's like when he like gets caught up into that. It's one of those kind of stories, I think, with like a revisionist history or lost history kind of a thing. Anyway, I am moderately excited about it. Like, I've heard actually pretty good things. I just haven't been in the mood to pick it up for whatever reason. When I pick up the next book, it's never this one, and it needs to be. I also finally took it from the library after hitting postpone a gazillion times, Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is the first book in the Books of Amba duology. I think it is young adult, and it is an Indian-inspired fantasy duology, and this was Tasha Suri's debut. Now, the reason I finally took it out from the library was because I think that with these Hollow Vows and reading the Dark Jewels or the Black Jewels, whatever, trilogy, I feel like maybe my not in the mood for YA angsty fantasy mood has shifted. So maybe I am in the mood for that, and if that is the case, I'm going to try out this one to see if it fits. And as I said, I've been putting it on postpone sort of at the library for several months now, so just gonna go for it, see if it works for me. I also obviously haven't taken this out from the library, and that's Ricochet by Krista and Becca Ritchie, and this is the second book in the Addicted series. While I didn't love it, I didn't hate it either, and part of me feels, even though it was like emotionally distressing, I feel a little bit invested in Lo and Lily. I don't actually really like them as people, but I feel somewhat invested, or like I just want to see this through with them. Like I actually want to see them through this addiction. As I said, the library hold for this book is 14 weeks. I don't know that I am going to be able to wait for that. So I could buy it, but that would mean buying a book, which was one of my goals for this year, was to buy less books, and particularly to make less impulsive purchases like this would kind of be. It wasn't a book that I was planning on buying. It wasn't a series that I'm all that invested on. It's just like, I want to read it now and not 14 weeks from now. It's a very reasonable price. I just feel a little bit guilty about buying it because it's also just a little bit of a wasteless purchase. It's not going to be a new favorite. I don't have super high expectations for this. I just want to read it to find out what happens. So I think I'm going to try to focus on a few other books. Like, it's not like I don't have other books I could be reading. So I'm going to give myself a few days. I'm going to, like, when you see something in a store and you're like, I'm going to wait and I'll come back in a few days if I'm still thinking about it. So that's kind of what I'm going to try to do with Ricochet. We'll see how that goes. I'll let you know next time. The next possible book that I could read, although I think that I'm going to be saving this for later in the month, is the second book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series by Marie Brennan. This is the Tropic of Serpents, I believe, and this is for our Memoirs of Lady Trent read-along that I'm doing with a few other channels. I'll link all of them down below. I'll also link like the read-along announcement video and the link for the Discord where we've been discussing the books. If you checked out or if you attended our live last week, thank you so much for joining live and or for watching the replay after the fact. I had such a great time talking with Sarah and Kate and Kristen and Maria about the first book, Natural History of Dragons. So the Tropic of Serpents is the next book. I am excited to get to it, but I do want to wait a little bit because I read the first book so quickly. So I'd like to read it a little bit closer to when we actually have the live chat for that. If you didn't join in on the first book last month, I would say that there is still lots of time to read both books. So you could still read A Natural History of Dragons, the first book, and the book for this month, The Tropic of Serpents. They are much shorter books, so you have lots of time to read them both if you want to catch up with us. Check out the Discord where we are all chatting about the books as we read them, and the live will be announced later on this month. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can hold my mug without spilling tea on myself again. Anyway, I will wrap it up here. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.